I think the most disturbing thing to me about the DaVinci Code is his misuse of the evidence. We can go through it and make a list of literally hundreds of errors that he makes in the novel, but underneath it all is just a total disregard for the integrity of historical evidence. And as an historian, this bothers me quite a bit. He acts as though you can do anything you want with historical evidence. You can date it anytime you please. You can ascribe authorship to anyone you please. But the fact is, that's not the truth. That's not what good historical thinking and writing is all about, even in a fictional context.
The ancient historian has a big task because he doesn't have a whole lot of evidence, and so he's really got to make do with what he has. But you've got to make sure that what you're reporting is honest. Is it based on fact and not on fantasy? And there we look for multiple authorship, multiple attestation if possible. You don't want just one source. You want several sources. And if you can find them, and if they correlate with one another, even coming from different directions and different biases, then you know that's historical fact. Another rule we can use is the so-called criterion of embarrassment, and that is when the thrust of a given historical source is in one direction, and yet it has to admit evidence that contravenes that argument, then you know that is true because the person has conceded that. And so that's another way of determining fact. Another thing we do is adjust for bias. For example, sometimes you can tell that an author is biased, or you know from his background that he is. Well, you throw in a countervailing filter against that bias to try to tease out the truth in the process. So this is what you call critical historical research, and all of us use it who are supposedly genuine historians.
It's important to sort out the facts with regard to a novel like the Da Vinci Code because of its claims about Christianity, one of the three great monotheistic faiths of the world. The Christianity lies at the base of our culture, and to understand it is to understand our own identity, both theologically and culturally. So to get the facts right is important.
The problem with Dan Brown's sort of conspiracy theory about history being so altered is that he doesn't accept history unless it fits within his preconceptions. Now, an honest reading of both the Bible and church history reveals that there was no effort to cover up all kinds of things. For example, if I'd been writing the Bible, I would have covered up the lies of Abraham, the anger fits of Moses, the sins of David. Boy, I sure wouldn't have reported any of that. Paul and Barnabas not being able to get along with each other and have to part ways. I would have massaged that. I would have had a public relations agent touch that all up. But the Bible is transparent. It's just honest. And so is church history. I've studied church history for the last 30 years, and I'm amazed at what is recorded about some of the key leaders we regard so highly in church history. It also tells the stories, their shortcomings, their sins, their failures. It's laid right out there. Dan Brown's thinking that history somehow is this plot or conspiracy to hide and manipulate truth, he doesn't realize that can't be done that easily. Truth has a way of emerging. That's an evidence of his very overactive imagination. One more evidence of the historical fallacies of the Da Vinci Code. So Dan Brown refers to the Vatican over and over in a negative light. He refers to the Vatican in the 4th century. The problem with that is the Vatican didn't exist in the 4th century. The Vatican, as we know it today, the earliest you might be to embryonically trace it, closer to what we know today, would be in the 500s or 600 mark, but not in the 4th century. In fact, the time he's referring to it, the Vatican was a cemetery on a hill.
The evidence for Jesus of Nazareth is really overpoweringly strong. We have 5,000 Greek documents in whole or in part of the New Testament, whereas some of the greatest historians from the past, for example, Cornelius Tacitus, we only have 1 or 2 medieval manuscripts that convey the word, and he's missing in places. So the documentary evidence is overpowering. Then when you examine the documents themselves, you look for errors to see if they're there. You look for misstatements. You do find that the four Gospels do have variations. There's no questions about that. But as a historian, I'm glad those variations are there, really, because it gives us a way of fine-tuning what really happened. And the evidence outside the New Testament in regard to the place names, the archaeological evidence, the other historical documentation, show us that basically that scriptural record in the New Testament is extremely reliable. And for that reason, you know, I haven't seen a miracle myself. I've never seen anyone rise from the dead and so forth. I can't prove, you know, that all this happened. But in terms of all the factors that make for credibility, in terms of an ancient source, I would say the New Testament and the Old are quite strong.